Mark Tremonti's chords are better than your chords, and in this video, we're going to discover why. My name's Jennison, and I'm thinking about guitar. And in this video, we're going to be discussing why Mark Tremonti's chords are superior to your chords. But fret not, they are also superior to my chords. They're superior to basically everybody's chords because Mark just writes really beautiful chord progressions. And in my opinion, this basically boils down to the voicings that he's using, because there are only so many ways you can string chords together, but there are an almost infinite number of ways that you can voice chords. Now, of course, we could go crazy on Mark's fingerstyle, acoustic, and clean electric writing, but in my opinion, some of the most interesting aspects of Mark Tremonti's writing, with Creed, with Alder Bridge, and with Tremonti, is in the way that he strings together big, distorted chords. And we're going to do this by looking at three distinct tunings. We'll be doing some derivation of standard tuning, like the E-flat tuning that I'm in right now, but this could be D standard, E standard, C standard, you name it, which is where we have the standard set of tuning intervals of a fourth, a fourth, a fourth, a major third, and a fourth, but just moved up or down by an appropriate number of semitones. So we could call this E-flat standard because the lowest string is tuned to E-flat, but the standard tuning relationship is maintained. The next type of tuning we're looking at is going to be a drop D derived tuning. Now this could be drop C, it could be drop A. The only distinction here is that we have a standard tuning, but we have the lowest string dropped by 2 frets or 1 tone, which gives us either drop C sharp or drop D flat, depending upon how you want to think about it. It's most common to call this drop C sharp, but either is fine. And once again, the name of the tuning comes from the lowest string that's being used. And in this case, the lowest string is tuned to a C sharp. This enables us to play single finger power chords, which are root 5 root, which would give us this. And the last subset of tunings we're going to take a look at is an example of open tuning. Now, Mark Tremonti is known for using a whole range of open tunings, but we're going to stick with one very common tuning, which is an open D5 or open C sharp 5 tuning. In this case, we're playing open C sharp. We'll explore these with some song examples in a moment, but the tuning in question is going to be this. We have C sharp, G sharp, and C sharp, much like the low 3 strings in our previous drop C sharp example, but then we take what was the F sharp string and tune it up to a G sharp, which means that this string and this string are an octave away from each other, similar to how these two are an octave away from each other, and the highest 2 strings are tuned to unison, which is also a C sharp. So we have C sharp, G sharp, C sharp, G sharp, C sharp, C sharp. This enables us, because we only have roots and 5s, to play one big power chord simply by strumming all the strings, or by placing one finger across all of the strings. Now, something that will facilitate these tunings is an appropriate string gauge, and this brings us to today's sponsor. This video is being brought to you by our friends at D'Addario, who've been kind enough not only to sponsor this video, but also to provide all of the strings that we need to make a video just like this. Now, I am a D'Addario artist, as is Mark Tremonti, and Mark relies upon D'Addario for all of the different string gauges he needs for all of his different tunings. And believe me, if you take a look at an Alder Bridge rig rundown, you will know that there are so many tunings, it's not even funny. So we'll flash up the strings that we're using for each example as we go through them. We'll begin by taking a look at some standard tuning chords. In this case, we're going to go to E-flat standard and take a look at the chords from Blackbird. Now, broadly speaking, this song is in the key of F sharp minor, but we'll refer to it as being in G minor because it's easier for us to visualize in our E-flat standard tuning. The way we might think about these chords are as follows. Our first chord will be a B flat major, followed by an F major, which leads us to an E flat major, a D major, an F major, and a C major. So we could play the chords to Blackbird in that very, very simple form, which would sound like this. It sounds fine, but it's nowhere near as inspiring as the original, and this is because it doesn't make use of one of the essential elements of Mark Tremonti's chord writing, which is voice leading. Now, voice leading is where we try and preserve a movement within our chord sequence. I'm going to switch to a clean sound, and I'm going to highlight the top note of each of the chords being played in the Blackbird progression. So you'll notice there is a distinct melodic flow to these chords that isn't present if we just block chord them, i.e. we play the chords with a standard power chord or a standard bar chord shape. Let's talk about how we're getting this. So our first chord is going to be a B flat power chord, which has this B flat note on top. So the next chord we need is going to be an F, but rather than jumping all the way down to this standard F power chord shape, Mark instead uses a first inversion F power chord. Now this is where we take two notes from our F chord, but rather than playing the standard root and fifth, in this case F and C, we play the third with the root on top. The first inversion comes from the fact that the third is on the bottom. Now the way we think of this is going to be with an A note, an F note, and then another A note here, but the root of the chord is actually the middle note. So it is still B flat F. The difference is, instead of doing this, we get this. Now effectively we've taken the top two notes of our B flat power chord and moved them down one semitone, but what it gives us is third, root, third on our F chord, and it also gives us this a melodic device as we lead from one chord to the other. Now the next two chords in this progression are standard power chords, but we're going to play them with an inversion. And in this case, we're going to be taking the fifth and placing it on the bottom. A lot of folks refer to this as the Dave Mustaine power chord, and I can see why. It's very common in Megadeth's oeuvre. But in this instance, what it allows us to do is to take this E flat and D power chord that we normally play as E flat, D, E flat, and then D, A, D. And rather than playing it with root, fifth, root, we instead take away this highest root note and introduce a fifth below. Now this is still the root of the power chord, this E flat, but the notes we're playing are B flat, E flat, B flat, which allows us to keep this B flat note as the melody note on top. And similarly, if we play the same thing for A, D, and A down one fret, we can preserve this little melodic movement of which is preserved at the top of our chord. And this has the effect of making the chords seem more coherent because they're not jumping all up and down in the guitar's register. They're all contained within a single space, which is a common technique for harmony vocalists, for arranging for orchestras and big bands. It's something that guitar players could really stand to do more of when it comes to playing beautiful chord progressions. Now you'll notice that none of the chords we played so far are particularly extravagant in terms of the notes that are involved in them. They're all either power chords or simple triads, but it is the voicing that makes them so good. Now the next chord we need is an F chord, and we could play that here. But rather than shooting up, we can preserve this A note on top of our melody by moving down here to this F triad. Now this is an F power chord, but we've included this A note on top to preserve the melody once again. So we have this. And again, we need a C chord next, and the C chord could be this C power chord, but rather, instead, we play this. Very juicy sounding inversion of a C, which gives us E on the bottom for our third, C for the root, so the root note is here, E again, and then finally a G on top on the open G string. Now this not only preserves the melody note on top, it also gives us two more descending moves as we move these F notes down to E notes. Now, all told, that gives us this really beautiful voice leading that creates a downward flow through a chord progression that would otherwise be jumping all over the place. Once again, if we play this with standard chord voicings, we can get this. That's a very steppy around kind of way, whereas if we flow it with these voice leading chords, the whole progression seems to step downwards in a smooth movement. Now, once you know what you're looking for with this, you will spot these kind of voice leading tricks all over Mark Tremonti's chord writing. But this is an example of some of the chords that he might use in his standard tuning setup. Next, we're going to switch to drop tuning. We're going to go all the way to drop C for this and take a look at some drop tuning tricks from my favorite alter bridge riff, which is the riff from Isolation. Now, as previously mentioned, Isolation is my favorite alter bridge riff from my favorite alter bridge album, which is, of course, AB3. I think it just hit me at exactly the right point in my musical development. But there are some beautiful chords in this riff that I want to take a look at. Now, if we were to play these as one-finger power chords, which we're able to do in our drop C tuning, it would give us the following. We'd have an A flat chord, followed by an E flat chord, and then a C power chord. And the riff would sound perfectly acceptable if we played it with just these one-finger chords like this. But that's not what's being played, and rather we have a stretched out version of a major triad, which gives us the following. On our 8th fret A flat chord, we have our root, our 5th, and rather than having a duplicate root note, we instead stretch out from root to 2nd to major 3rd. And the same is true down here in the E flat, which is 3, 3, and then 7, for root, 5th, major 3rd, and finally we get the same chord in the open position, which is open, open, and 4, once again for root, 5th, and major 3rd, and this presents us with the opportunity to play what in some circles is called a Picardy 3rd on the root note, where the riff is very obviously minor in terms of its construction, but we play a major chord on the root to give us some unexpected brightness, which in turn lifts the energy of the riff when we land on that root note, which we can also then dispel with this one open Phrygian type shape. It really takes us on a journey that we don't get if we just play these as power chords. As a comparison, here's the power chord version, which feels minor throughout, but here is the major triad version, which gives us this lift when we get to the open position. Much more evocative and something that has that very cool post-grunge sound that we like from Mark's Creed era writing. Now, this is something that we can apply to any single finger drop tuned power chord. For example, if we played on fret number 5, which in this instance is going to give us an F chord, We can convert that into an F minor chord simply by playing 3 frets higher on the highest string, which would give us 5, 5, and 8 for root 5th and minor 3rd, which we can then move around to get a major shape up here, a major shape here. We could also convert that into a sus2 shape. For all sorts of very evocative chords in this root position. And interestingly, these have the same construction of root 5th and then 3rd up the octave as the Eric Johnson chord shapes like these ones. And it's the fact that these intervals are so spread out, which is why they work so well with distortion. If we tried to play the same thing in a close grouping, where we played root 3rd, 5th, it might sound a little bit of a mess. Perhaps something a little bit like this. Which is a gross mess as opposed to this. Where even under a ton of distortion, those chord values are still very clear. But there are also some other cool inversions we can use, such as the ones found in the chorus section of Slip to the Void, which sounds like this. Now for this riff, we're back up in drop C sharp, which you might think of as drop D, but down 1 semitone. Does warrant some slightly heavier strings than usual though, which is why we've got this 10 to 52 set on, which again is Mark Tremonti's personal preference when it comes to playing in near standard tunings. There's enough tension on the lows to keep things nice and tight, but there's also enough looseness on the highs for soloing and for these unison bend type lines. Anyway, onto the riff itself. We begin with a very big open sounding root position power chord, which gives us the following. We play root 5th, root again, and then a duplicate version of the root up 1 octave on fret number 7 on the G string. Now we also transition from here into the flat 6 chord, which in this case is going to be an A major 7th. Now we could play it like this. But instead of playing that, what we get is this. Which is a huge and sonorous sounding chord that gives us 7th fret A, and then the major 7th on this G sharp right next door to it, followed by our C sharp note for the major 3rd, and the octave of that major 3rd on the 7th fret, which gives essentially root, major 7th, major 3rd, major 3rd. A very big and very sonorous sounding version of this chord. But the next chord is really interesting, which is this one that reads 9, 10, 9. A very big and very sonorous sounding version of that chord. But what's next is really interesting. We get this voicing that reads 9, 10, 9. Now what's going on here is we're playing a first inversion of this F sharp chord. So instead of this F sharp being the root, we're instead playing this one, which is on our 10th fret. We're following it up with the major 3rd directly above. So we have root major 3rd. This is actually the root note here. And then we can move that major 3rd down 1 octave and play that alongside. So we have major 3rd, root major 3rd. Which in turn gives us this very evocative feel as we move from this 4 major that hints at Dorian to this flat 2 major which hints at Phrygian. But this also leads me into our next tuning, which is what I think of as a Mark Tremonti staple, which is an open power chord tuning. And for this, we're going to take a look at Ghost of Days Gone By. A beautiful riff and about as alter bridge ballad as it gets before things get really moody. You can check out more on that in our interview with Miles Kennedy and Mark Tremonti on the Thinking About Guitar YouTube channel. But let's take a second and talk about the tuning we're playing in here, which is a really interesting and again, very, very alter bridge style tuning, which you might call open C sharp. Now, our first chord is going to be an F sharp sus2 chord, which gives us the following. We have F sharp, a C sharp here, and then up here a G sharp, which sounds cool on its own, but if we also ring out the highest two strings, we get the fifth of the chord played again on this drony pseudo 12-string sound on the highest two strings. We can then take the same shape and we can move it down 3 frets to get a D sharp sus2, but this also works very well as a minor chord. So in this instance, we would take the pinky finger and move it from fret number 4 up to fret number 5 for this 2, 2, 5, and then also ringing those highest two strings to turn this into a D sharp minor 7 chord. Very nice. We get root, fifth, minor third, and then with the C sharp on top, that becomes our minor 7. Very cool sound, very chimey and very open, and certainly very epic sounding. The next chord we get is an A sharp power chord, but we're actually going to play this using an inversion. Now, we could play it here on fret number 2 of the 5th string, and then play its 5th up here on fret number 4 of the 4th string. But because this string and this string are in octaves, we can also play this note here to get this, which is an inversion type that we can use when we're playing in drop D. But because this string and this string are also octaves, we can take this and move it up here to create essentially 2 power chords at once. Where these 2 strings and these 2 strings are an octave of each other. Which leads us into this beautiful sounding G sharp add 11 chord. Quite a wild name, but let me talk you through what's going on here. So here we are playing the open G sharp string for the root of the chord. The 5th is on the 4th string, which is going to be on fret number 2. And then we play the major 3rd up here on the 3rd string, which we're playing on fret number 4. But not only this, by ringing out the highest 2 strings, we get the 4th of the chord, which in this case, in terms of the chord spelling, would be the 11th, which gives us this beautiful open sound. And as if that wasn't enough, we can also get a little bit of emotion between the 3rd and the 2nd on our 3rd string. Which is a beautiful, epic, and open sound that actually works really well with distortion, even though there's a lot of musical information happening here. Now, if you'd like a little guidance on your tone and how you can sound more like Mark Tremonti when you're playing these riffs, we also have a video on getting the Mark Tremonti alter bridge riffing tone on 3 different budgets. You can check that out on the Thinking About Guitar YouTube channel. But for the time being, that has been a little bit of a look at Mark Tremonti's chord voicings. Hope you've learned something. I certainly learned something putting this video together, and I'll be employing this in my own songwriting. Again, the whole thing with this is that it's about experimenting and it's about having a musical vision and making sure that you are clear in what you're trying to say with your playing, and also using all the tools at your disposal and not just relying on those common, often overplayed tropes. My name's Jennison. I'm Thinking About Guitar. I'll see you again very soon.